The first presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is set for 2 weeks from today. But will it actually happen? The campaigns are sparring over debate rules, and Trump is complaining about ABC News, which is hosting the debate. Trump says the network is biased against him. The Hill White House reporter Brett Samuels joins us to discuss. Brett, let's start with the rules. One of the big questions is, will there be hot mics? Why is this an issue, and what's the latest?
Yeah, this seems to be the big hang-up as far as format at this point. In the first debate that former President Trump and President Biden had in June, the Biden campaign had pushed for, and the Trump campaign accepted this rule where the mics would be turned off when the candidate wasn't speaking. So essentially, the idea was that then viewers wouldn't be able to hear if a candidate was interrupting or speaking out of turn. But the Harris campaign has since replacing Biden atop the ticket, has sort of pivoted on that. And they have said that they want the mics to be open throughout the debate. And essentially what they're hoping is that viewers will be able to hear if Trump is interrupting, be able to hear if Trump is speaking out of turn or trying to talk over the vice president. And they feel that that will sort of turn viewers off and remind them why they don't like the former president. The Trump campaign has basically said, we agreed to these rules already previously where the mics were turned off. Trump himself has sort of said, that he could go either way. So he sort of undercut his own campaign there. But as you mentioned, the former president has also complained about ABC News, accused them of bias. So there's just a lot of sort of, complaints or disagreements sort of floating in the ether here where, I still think this debate will happen, but certainly there's a lot of tension and a lot of uncertainty over what it will look like and whether ABC will end up actually being the host on September 10th.
There's also the question of will the candidates be standing or sitting? Will they be allowed to have notes? Will there be a live audience? When will all these details get sorted out? Because it seems like we're getting pretty close here to the actual debate day.
Yeah, definitely getting close to crunch time. It's only about 2 weeks away from when this debate is supposed to happen. I think what will end up happening is that the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign are going to agree to essentially move forward with the same format as the Biden debate when it comes to candidates standing the entire time, no notes. Opening statements weren't a thing in the Biden-Trump debate, so I would be surprised if that changes. And it seems like the Harris campaign is sort of seizing on these comments from Trump that he would be fine if the microphones were turned on. So that seems to be the one hangup where the Harris campaign wanted a change from the first debate. So that's the one area where I think once the two sides agree to that and move past that, that is sort of the microphone issue is the one thing to get past, I think, before this is set in stone.
Do we know about the live audience issue? Because that seems like it would really impact the tenor of the debate and what it would feel like for people watching it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no expectation that there will be a live audience at this point for this debate. There wasn't one in the June debate. The Harris campaign is not going to agree to one from what I've heard for this debate. They want it to be, about the two candidates, about the issues, about what they're talking about. Trump obviously thrives off having a crowd, thrives off having people either cheering him or interrupting or booing or whatever it may be. So the Harris campaign certainly wants to deprive him of that, even though Trump himself had pushed for other debates with a live audience. I don't expect that we'll see that at the September 10th debate, but perhaps in a future debate, that's something that Trump will really push for.
A new election analysis says the nomination of Kamala Harris is boosting Democrats' chances of winning the White House and controlling Congress. The analysis by Decision Desk HQ puts Harris's chance of winning the presidency at 55%. Brett, that's still pretty much a toss-up, but it is an improvement from where Biden was when he was still in the race.
Yeah, absolutely. Democrats, I think if you told them a month ago or 6 weeks ago that they would basically have a slightly better than a coin flip chance of winning the White House, they'd be thrilled with that. I think it goes to show, that same analysis when Biden was still in the race toward the very end of his candidacy had Trump, I believe, was over 60% chance of winning the White House. So certainly just, I think, underscores how rapidly and how quickly Vice President Harris has changed the dynamic of this race, how quickly she's built momentum, built excitement among Democrats, and put a lot of states in play that President Biden really was kind of, losing his chance of winning. So, it just goes to show how quickly things have changed, and certainly still, about 2 months left until Election Day, so things can change. But I think the Harris campaign and Democrats are very happy with kind of where things stand at this point.
Let's talk about the race for the control of Congress. This was always going to be a tough year for Senate Democrats. They're defending several seats in red states. In the House, there's an intense battle over a handful of seats, especially in New York and California, that will be crucial in deciding the balance of power. What does this new forecast say about the fight for control of Congress?
Yeah, so, as you mentioned, obviously Democrats really face a tough battle to retain their already very narrow majority in the Senate, and this forecast, gives Republicans about a 2/3 chance, over 60% chance of winning back control of the Senate. As you mentioned, Democrats have to defend seats in West Virginia, Montana, Ohio, Arizona, some really tough states. Obviously, Texas and Florida are sort of the two places where Democrats would have to flip seats, and those are pretty red states. So this forecast takes that into account and reflects what you would expect, which is that Republicans have a pretty good chance of taking back control of the Senate. On the House side, the forecast also gives Republicans a little bit better than a coin flip chance of winning back or retaining control of the House, I should say. Obviously, Republicans have a pretty slim majority right now. This forecast from Decision Desk and The Hill gives Republicans as I said, slightly better than a coin flip chance of keeping control of the House. As you mentioned, it's going to come down to just a handful of competitive districts in New York and California, and a handful of swing seats elsewhere. But certainly, I think, one thing to watch is the presidential race, because if Vice President Harris does do very well in the presidential race, if she's able to win states like Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, that could bode well for Democrats and help them with their chances of winning back control of the House.
The Republican Speaker of the House says Kamala Harris is not feared by adversaries of the United States. During a segment on Fox News, Speaker Mike Johnson made a pitch for Donald Trump's return to the White House, saying only he is feared and respected by U.S. adversaries. Critics might point out that a lot of U.S. allies also fear Trump. But do you think this will be a major theme of Trump's attacks on Harris?
Absolutely. This is something that former President Trump talks about at a lot of his rallies, this idea that the United States isn't feared anymore, it's not respected anymore, that other nations like Russia, like North Korea, like China view the Biden administration as weak. And a lot of his pitch on foreign policy is sort of centered on this idea that, if Trump is reelected, he will reinstill fear in adversaries, that they wouldn't dare to cross him by invading Ukraine, for example, or targeting Israel, talking about Iran, for example. So this is something I think we're going to continue to hear from the former president, is this idea that, he's a strong leader, he's unpredictable, and that can be a good thing because then adversaries don't want to upset him, compared to the Biden and Harris team, which, has obviously rebuilt alliances that Trump sort of tested, I think, during his 4 years in office. But certainly, Trump will point to those wars in Ukraine, in Israel, and elsewhere to say that the strategy is just not working.
More than 200 former aides to Republican presidential nominees have signed an open letter endorsing Kamala Harris for president. Many of the signees who worked under George W. Bush, John McCain, and Mitt Romney also endorsed Biden in 2020. The Harris campaign is touting the endorsements as part of its strategy to win over some Republicans. Tell us more about that effort.
Yeah, this has been a really concerted effort from the Harris campaign to highlight these Republicans who have not, maybe not publicly backed a Democratic candidate in the past, but now are coming forward and doing that this time around. They've really emphasized this idea that a lot of these Republicans view Donald Trump as this grave threat to democracy, that they just can't support a candidate like Donald Trump, given what he did his last 4 years in office, given the events of January 6th, given some of what he's saying he'll do if he's reelected in November. So, we've seen sort of a steady stream of Republicans being rolled out by the Harris campaign. Obviously, we saw the Democratic convention. Adam Kinzinger spoke, Stephanie Grisham, the former press secretary to Donald Trump, Olivia Troy, who worked in the Trump-Pence administration, Jeff Duncan, who was the Georgia lieutenant governor. And now, as you mentioned, this letter of over 200 officials who worked, with the last few Republican nominees prior to Trump, including some high-profile names like Judge Michael Luttig, who's a pretty prominent conservative legal scholar, was among those who signed this letter. So the Harris campaign is going to keep pumping these out. I think they're going to keep highlighting this fact that there are Republicans who are willing to put country over party, as they say, and back a Democratic nominee, and hope that that encourages folks who backed Nikki Haley, for example, in a primary, to do the same in November.
The band, the Foo Fighters, says Donald Trump did not have permission to use one of their songs at a rally and is promising to donate any royalties from it to the Kamala Harris campaign. Brett, this isn't the first time Trump has been criticized for using music without permission.
Yeah, absolutely. This is sort of a pretty lengthy trend, and it's hindered Trump's ability to make a more fulsome playlist, I think. But yeah, we saw just last week when former President Trump and RFK Jr. held this rally together in Arizona, that when Robert Kennedy Jr. came out on stage, this Foo Fighters song, "My Hero," played as he walked out. It was this big, bombastic entrance. And the Foo Fighters were very quickly weighing in to say that they didn't give permission for them to use that song. Now, the Trump campaign has disputed that. They've said that they have a license, to use that particular song. So they're kind of standing by it. They've jabbed at the Foo Fighters on social media using some of their song titles. So, to be continued whether they will continue to use the Foo Fighters music. But certainly, we've seen in the past, Neil Young, for example, has pushed back on the Trump campaign using their music. Rihanna has pushed back on the Trump campaign using their music. So pickings are getting a little slimmer for the Trump campaign. We'll see if they're able to keep using this Foo Fighters song.
There are new developments in Trump's classified documents case. This week, special counsel Jack Smith filed legal documents asking an appellate court to revive the case after a Florida judge ruled Smith was unlawfully appointed. Many legal observers have questioned the ruling from Judge Eileen Cannon, who was appointed by Donald Trump. What are the prospects for this case moving forward?
Yeah, so this is going to the appeals court in Florida, and Jack Smith had sort of signaled that he might appeal this case. And essentially, this filing is saying that Judge Cannon, who has come under a fair amount of criticism, I think, from some legal scholars, certainly from Jack Smith and his team, and from Democrats. Jack Smith is arguing that she erred here in multiple ways by throwing out this case. Certainly, this was viewed as the strongest case, arguably, against former President Trump and his handling of classified documents. So this will go to the appeals court. We'll see how they rule in the coming weeks and months. But a couple things to watch is, A, obviously, do they reinstate the case against the former president, which itself would be significant, and B, do they order that a new judge be put in place to oversee the case? Now, Jack Smith didn't specifically ask for that to happen in his filing. He didn't specifically ask for Eileen Cannon to be replaced as the judge, but that is something to watch, I think, just given all the scrutiny that she's come under in how she's handled this classified documents case.
RFK Jr. has dealt a political wild card after dropping out of the presidential race and backing Trump. Many Kennedys and Democrats have slammed the decision, but what kind of impact can we expect to see? It seems RFK Jr. is looking to make his way into Trump's cabinet, and even said this week that the former president asked him to serve on his transition team.
Yeah, Democrats have really kind of seized on those comments that you mentioned there, that Kennedy has said that he'd be serving in some kind of role to pick out who would serve in a Trump administration, that he might get some kind of either cabinet role or advisory role. Democrats have really pointed those comments to basically argue that this was just kind of a trade-off where, in exchange for Kennedy's support, Trump is promising him influence in another administration. So Democrats are saying this is sort of just another example of, swamp politics, if you will, to borrow a phrase from the Trump campaign. But as far as what impact he'll have on the election, I think it's hard to say right now. You don't want to overestimate it, obviously, because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was only polling in the pretty low single digits by the time he dropped out. And polls had shown that his supporters were sort of low propensity voters who maybe couldn't even be trusted to vote in November. But that said, if a few thousand Kennedy supporters in a state like Arizona, in a state like Pennsylvania or Nevada, where the margin is going to be really close in November, if a few thousand of those voters go and back Donald Trump, that could, certainly help Trump. I think, you don't want to overstate the difference it will make, but I think, it's fair to say that this is good news for Donald Trump, as his campaign has said, because he stands to gain a majority of the supporters of RFK here come November.
In a closely watched Senate race in Arizona, the Democratic candidate Representative Ruben Gallego received an endorsement from the Arizona Police Association, dealing a blow to Republican Kari Lake. What's interesting is the association decided to do a split party endorsement, throwing its weight behind Trump in the presidential election. The group endorsed Lake in her last gubernatorial bid. What has changed since then, and what does that say about the state of this race?
Yeah, I think, a couple of things. Obviously, as you mentioned, this group endorsed Kari Lake in her gubernatorial bid just a couple of years ago. But, I think there is this sense of almost exhaustion among some Republicans, among some conservatives with Kari Lake. Obviously, polls have shown her trailing Ruben Gallego in this race. Kari Lake has been sort of in the spotlight in Arizona for a few years. She remained sort of in the spotlight after she lost her gubernatorial bid because she was challenging the election results. So I think it's just sort of folks aren't really sure what Kari Lake is offering besides, just parroting a lot of Trump talking points and continuing this same sort of shtick that she used 2 years ago when she ran for governor. Ruben Gallego is sort of tacked to the center to sort of, put off these allegations that he's some sort of far left liberal. This endorsement from a police group, I think, is evidence of that strategy, that he has really tried to appeal to the center to win over those more moderate voters who Kari Lake would absolutely need, I think, if she's to win in November. Polling has certainly shown that Ruben Gallego is, he's not a lock to win in November by any means, but he is ahead of Kari Lake, and this endorsement, I think, just kind of bolsters his case of his campaign running to the center.
Mark Zuckerberg sent a letter this week to the House Judiciary Committee speaking out on government influence and how senior Biden administration officials repeatedly pressured Meta to censor content related to COVID-19. Republicans have praised the letter as a win for free speech. What else did Zuckerberg say in this letter, and why now? Is this insight into how Facebook will handle moderation of content when it comes to this election?
Yeah, so, in addition, obviously, you mentioned the COVID-19 factor and how Mark Zuckerberg was talking about how the outlet or the company handled that during the pandemic. On top of that, he addressed, essentially acknowledging that there were some issues with how Meta and Facebook handled the Hunter Biden laptop story that was reported during the 2020 campaign. And obviously, there were allegations that Facebook had suppressed, sharing of that link, and he sort of acknowledged that the company should have handled that differently, that they should not have sort of limited sharing of that story about Hunter Biden's laptop. And moving forward, as you mentioned, Mark Zuckerberg is essentially telling lawmakers that he has no plans to donate large sums of money to political candidates and political causes as he did in past years. So essentially signaling to lawmakers, that he's going to kind of stay out of this election in November, which I think is welcome news to Republicans, certainly, who had for years accused Facebook and accused Meta of sort of conservative bias, being more harsher on conservatives and conservative speech than they were on Democrats and liberal speech. So certainly, I think this letter is welcome news for Republicans, especially heading to November, where all eyes will be on Facebook, how they moderate content, but also how Mark Zuckerberg, maybe uses his personal fortune to play in the election.
All right, that's all I got. Thank you so much, Brett Samuels.
Thanks for having me.
And that's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.